Hi everyone. Today I'm here to tell you about our framework and how we managed to make it a little bit smarter and a little bit self-aware. So, after this great introduction, I don't need to tell you that much about myself, but let's go into some more professional details. So, I'm an automation lead at Honeywell Aerospace, and the product that we're doing is data analytics for the aviation industry. So let's start with performance. Everyone speaks performance, I know that, but we always want things to go faster. We want our hardware to be faster, and our software to be faster, and of course, we want our tests to be faster. And because our product is operating with a lot of data, our functional Selenium tests sometimes really take pretty long time. I'm speaking like 6 to 8 hours for the full suite to run. And we don't just want our tests to be faster, we need them to be faster. And we have invested a lot of time and a lot of effort, me and my team, into doing this, like attending conferences like this one. This is our favorite part. But while we were struggling with our performance issues, we were also developing our suite. And we were adding a lot of new tests and covering new functionalities. So before we know it, we had a lot of tests going on. And we had like over 1,000 test cases. How? Well, we had over 170 test cases which were executed on 2 different branches for over 35 client modifications. And do you know what goes with over 1,000 test cases? Well, you have over 1,000 test results. And of course, we all want to see our test results in green and just go and grab a coffee. But with that many test cases, you rarely are that lucky. So you always have some failures, and you always need somebody to go through those failures and to analyze them. And we realized that we have a very different performance problem. Our daily test results monitoring was taking a really long time. We needed one person to spend his entire day doing this. And we didn't think it's a really funny job. I mean, everyone wanted to be writing code, to be developing the framework further and stuff like that. And we didn't really want to just sit down and look through failures. In fact, the very worst job that I had was doing this for the whole day. So we were like, OK, let's do something about it. After all, we're living in the time of smart cars and smart TVs and even smart refrigerators. So surely we can make our testing framework a little bit smarter, and we can make it to get some of the job done for us. And we started by doing an analysis of what a person is doing whenever we detect a failure. And the first thing to do is always to check if the defect is already reported, because this is defining your next steps. So, given that it's reported, we need to check its status. We need to know, is the ticket fixed? Is it reproducible? So, in case that the defect is not reported, we would like to log a new defect. How can we translate those steps for our framework? And can we do it? Well, in fact, they're pretty simple. So, sure, we can do this. The first thing that we need to do is, whenever we have a failure for which we do have a defect already, we just don't want to see it. We're not going to display such failures. Then, if we did have a defect associated with our tests, we want to check its status, again, just like when we're doing it in person. And can the framework do this for us? Oh, given that most of the modern-day applications have open APIs for communicating with other apps, most bug trackers have them too. So definitely we can use this to connect our framework and our bug tracker and ask them to do it for us. And finally, doing those very same APIs, we can make the logging of the defects automated. So having all this done, we can move to the concept. I'm going to just need 1 minute. Sorry for this. The funny thing is that I thought I have too much time and that I wouldn't be able to fill it up. So this problem is solved. I can move on. All right, our concept. Well, what we want to do is for every defect, for every test that we're running, we want first to get all the defects associated with it. And then for each defect, we want to check its status. Based on this status, we're going to make a decision if we want to execute. And yes, I mean a decision if you want to execute. Now, maybe you're wondering, why would I not execute my tests? But let's say that you have a defect associated with your test case, and this defect is active, and you know it's a blocker. And your test case is going to take some time and some resources to be executed. If you already know the result, you already know your test is going to fail, then there is no point to execute it. So instead of just marking our failures as expected, we're just not going to execute the test that we're certain will be failures. And finally, we would like to update the status of our tickets. Now, how did we do it? In order to explain you the steps further, I will have to give you a little bit background for the tech setup that we have in Honeywell. So on one side, we have a UI testing framework, which is Java-based. It's using Selenium, of course. And we're using testng to execute our tests. And we're using REST Assured library for REST APIs communication. On the other side, we have Atlassian Jira bug tracker system. It has a really nice REST API, and we have enabled this. Now we can bring those two together, and we can create our very own testing Voltron. So what's beneath all the metal? Let's get into implementation. Like I already told you, the most important thing for you is going to be to build a link between your test cases and your defects. And the way that we chose to do it is by using testng's groups functionality. So we're getting the ticket ID, and we're setting it as a testng group for every ticket, for every test case that is affected by this defect, as you can see in the example. We're going to use the testng annotation transformer interface to be able to collect all the groups for all the test cases we want to execute. The only thing we need to pay attention to is that this is happening before the entire execution and not on a test-by-test basis. Now that we have collected all our defects, we want to check their statuses. And we're going to be using Jira's get method, for which we will need to authenticate our framework into Jira. And for this, I strongly advise you to have a separate user created in the system. The reasons are obvious, I think. Then we're going to use REST Assured to make our API call. It's a very simple job, and everything that we're going to need are our credentials, the address of your Jira instance, and the ID of your tickets. And now we're getting to the hard part, making this decision. In order to find out if you want to execute a test or if it's going to fail, you have to use your bug tracker. And also, you need to know your ticket life cycles, or in our case, our Jira workflow. We have 4 major stages that our tickets go through. And the first one is whenever a defect is created, which is new. Then we have tickets which are merged in our head environment, or our first integration environment. Then we have tickets merged in RC, which is our second and stable environment. And finally, the tickets that are resolved or closed. Why do we need this information? Because in order to know if a defect is active, we need to know if it's affecting the environment that we're currently testing in terms of branch or client modification, versionings, etc. So we're going to need a lot of details from our bug tracker system in order to make the correct decision. And to help with this, we have created this decision table. Probably some of you are not seeing it, and that's kind of the point, because we're not going to need this thing. We're not going to have to look at it or use it. We're just going to implement it once, and then we're going to turn our framework into our own personal assistant. We're going to make it almost as Tony Stark Jarvis. Well, minus the voice control, the weapons, the flying, and all the cool stuff. So our final step, which you can decide if you want to take, and you probably would do it when you're feeling comfortable with your integration and what you're doing already, is to update your ticket. And you have a few options which are offered by TestNG, if that's what you like to use, like the after invocation method, which is called after each method, or the on-test failure and on-test success methods. You also have 2 directions that you can take. You can be a little bit more conservative, and you can just leave a comment in your bug tracker which states what's the result of your execution. Or you can even go one step further, and you can just update your ticket. Like, you can close it, or you can reopen it. Now, after all those explanations and a few interruptions, let's get into the example. So let's see how we disable a test. What you're seeing is a ticket in our Jira system, and the important things are the ID of this ticket, its type, and its status, which currently is open or active. The test that we're going to use is super simple, and we're going to add as a TestNG group the ID of the ticket. I'm using an XML suite to run my tests. Here's the test that I'm going to be running, and here are the major TestNG classes that will be doing the work: the listener and the TestNG annotation transformer. Now, when I start executing this test, the first thing that the framework is going to do is to check if the test is disabled. And to do this, first we're going to collect all the defects which are associated with it by taking the groups, by reading the groups. And if the group is starting, in our case, with def, then it means it is a Jira ticket. And we're going to query our Jira and check the details about this ticket. So as I said, we're going to use rest assured to build our request and parse our response. And once that we get a response which is OK, we can initialize our Jira object. And we have a few important properties of this object. And the first thing is the clients that it's applicable for, or the versions which it's applicable for. In our case, that's O. And also the build number that it's being detected in, because it's going to hint us for which branch this defect was filed. The status, which is for implementation, or opened, and the type of the ticket. Now that we have this information, we are ready to answer the two important questions. Is this ticket active, or is the branch that we are running our test onto affected by it? So in this case, it is. And then, is this issue applicable, or is the client that we're testing affected by this issue? Again, it's true. So because our conditions are met, we're going to disable our tests. And don't worry, those tests are not just going into the void, or they're not going to disappear. We're going to leave a message which is saying exactly which test case were disabled and which tickets were guilty for it. Finally, we're going to disable this test. And when you open your test report at the end, you are going to see that we have no failures registered, or no skipped tests. Because when you're disabling a method with test_ng, it means that you're not going to execute it at all, neither the tests nor any setup or teardown methods. So you're going to save time twice. First, from execution, which is not going to give you any new information, and then from looking at this report and trying to separate the valuable information from what you already know. And let's see the second case, when our defect has been fixed and we want to verify if this is the case. So I'm going to close this ticket in Jira, and I'm going to re-execute the very same test. But as you can see, I'm not leaving it any chance. So I know it's going to fail. And after invocation, I can do a lot of stuff thanks to test_ng. At this point, I'm going to have access to both the groups which contain the Jira tickets and information about the execution, like not just the status, but if I want to grab the exception or any other reasons for my failure, I can do it from here. So again, I'm going to connect to Jira, and I have my ticket ID. So in this case, I'm not going to update my ticket, but I'm just going to leave a comment, which depends on whether my test was successful or it was failed. So in my case, it's a failure, and the messages are in JSON format, so it's pretty easy to do this. And you can see that in your defect tracking system, you have a comment added. So whenever you open it, you can decide if you want to change status or return it to developer or whatever. And in this case, you can see that we do have one failure because we did execute the test. And even though it sounds good and it looks good, unfortunately, the night is dark and full of terrors. And sometimes there are some potential hazards that we meet in our way. And the first danger that you're going to face is that if you're not careful, you're going to overrun your bug tracker system with comments. Because imagine that you're executing one test 100 times today, and you may leave like 100 similar comments. Nobody would want that. Then even worse, you could be opening or closing irrelevant defects. So this is a very serious thing to think about. And last but not least, our current solution requires from you to change your source code every time you log a new defect. And you have to be committing, and you have to be changing your code a lot, which is not ideal. So can we do something about it? We can always do something about it. First of all, again, using the API, we can be checking if every ticket that we're interested in already has comments left by our framework in a certain time frame. So you can make sure that you're not duplicating comments and leaving the same information over and over again. Opening tickets automatically is one of the most sensitive parts, and it's been the biggest issue that we are facing with our implementation. And so far, what we're doing is just we have implemented a very strict policy regarding when do we want to open a new ticket and what do we want to allow the framework to do, because our Jira is open for our clients, and we just can't allow to post random stuff in there. And for the last part, we realized it was the hardest to amend, because we had to go to the very beginning of our solution, and we have to almost inverse the concept. So we found a rather alternative solution. And when I say inverse, I really mean we had to kind of inverse it. Because what I've just showed you is we have put all our defect IDs into our source code next to our test cases. And we were like, why are we doing this? In fact, every bug tracker is a big database. It contains data. So why just not add all the test cases that are affected into our defect tracker? And we came up with a solution which consists of 3 major stages. And the first one is very easy and one time only. You have to make a slight modification in your system. And you need to add a new field which is going to contain the names of the test cases affected by each defect. Then, whenever you are logging a new defect, all you have to do is fill this field with the names of the test cases that the defect is going to block or affect. And it's really easy because you're already there. You're already logging your defect, and filling one more item is a lot easier than having to log your defect, then open your source code, and add the ID of the ticket. And finally, again, when you're deciding if you want to execute something or not, you can leave a lot of the work for your bug tracker. And what you're going to do is you're going to first query for active tickets which have this field non-empty. And once you get the list of those tickets, you're going to extract from there the list of all the test cases that should be disabled. And finally, you're going to exclude those test cases from your execution. And at this point, maybe some of you are wondering, why did you see the first part then? Why didn't we just do that? Well, because, as Simon said just a few minutes ago, when we first thought about this, we had no idea what we were doing. So we went along, we decided, let's build something, and then we tried to build upon it. So this is not yet implemented, but you can save yourself some time and move directly to it. This is our next project in my company. And for the conclusion, I can say that after we did this, we got some pretty impressive results. For just 1 year, our monitoring time dropped by 50%. Our Jira duplicates dropped with 36%. The pass-through defect rate was also lowered, and the time to next delivery was decreased by 27%. Now, those results look pretty good. And maybe you're wondering, how did we measure those? Or how did we calculate them? Well, we didn't. I can't give you those numbers, because those things are really hard to measure. And it does look good, and it will help you, but there is no clean-cut statistics that we've managed to have about what you're going to get with this. And I can definitely tell you that you're not going to cut your monitoring time by 90%. You're still going to have to be involved with this. You're still going to have to invest a lot of time and a lot of effort, because logging defects is not that easy that some people might think. And unless you're already doing this, for which I'm admiring you so much, guys, you're probably not going to start to deploy on production 10 times a day. And finally, you're definitely not becoming famous as Elon Musk. However, there's some good stuff coming. I can promise you that you will reduce your test execution time, not just the monitoring. Because, as I said, whenever you're disabling your test cases, you're saving execution time, and you're saving time for setup and for tear down. And not just time, but also resources, because it depends how hungry your tests are. Also, you're going to make your Jenkins builds great again, because if you remove all the tests that you already know are going to fail, then you have a lot of higher chances of getting a blue build. And, of course, you will get back valuable time from monitoring results. In the beginning of this talk, I told you that it was taking for us an entire person day, like 8 hours of going through the results and trying to explain everything. Well, right now, officially, it takes us 4 hours. Unofficially, like 2, but I hope my boss is not watching. So, thank you very much for bearing with me and for the little technical difficulties. And I was so fast that you can even ask me some questions.
Thank you, Aneta. Do we have some questions? Okay, I can see one. Ruth is running.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. The question is, you said that you're not showing the difference between skip tests and disappeared tests, right?
No, I'm very sure.
Yeah, okay. On one of the slides, you showed none of the tests were succeed, none of them were failed, and none skipped.
Yep.
Yeah. How do you measure, how do you get that, let's say, 90% of your tests weren't disappeared from your test run? And let's say you had some kind of bug in your code, and 90% of the tests disappeared, magically disappeared. And yeah, it took only 0 seconds to run all the build. So how do you find this?
We're logging everything. This is how you find it. Just before I showed this, I also showed a slide, yep, where we are leaving the information, like this one. So whenever you disable, because TestNG has a built-in support for, in fact, four possibilities. Your test can pass, it can fail, it can be skipped, or it can be disabled. So whenever we disable a test and we remove it from this report, we are adding a log message, which is telling us the name of the test and the reason that we're doing it. And we're using just logs, but you can be feeding this information to whatever system you want. You can even be sending emails to yourself if you want.
Okay, we have next question. And even two next questions. Yeah, this one was first. Okay, I'm trying to cue all of you.
Yeah, you've got in your first part you said the annotation. When you file a bug, you get an ID back from Jira. But how do you update your scripts? Do you do it manually? So at the end of the run, you get a list of all the annotations you need to add, do a commit, and then it's saved to Git, for example? Or do you also do it automatically?
This was one of the problems that we're facing with the current solutions, and one of the biggest reasons for the alternative ones that I showed, because yes, currently whenever we walk a defect, somebody has to manually go into the code and add it. Was that your question?
Yeah, is that now automated? Or do you still need to do it manually, add the annotation manually?
We have found a way to do it automatically, which I have tested, so I know it works, but it's not in production. So, but
okay.
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay.
Okay, next question was from here. I can give you.
Hello, Aneta.
Hello.
Thank you. I find the idea is pretty awesome. My name is Yuri. I have a question. As far as I understood, that every time you see the report, you only see it red when you face a new issue in your system. So if you have known issue, the report is still green. So how do you manage your let go to production message?
Excuse me, the last part?
How do you manage your let go to production message? How do you let your developers go to production with current implementations, even though your report is green, and you simply don't see that any known issue?
Our report is not the only thing that they're using to decide if they want to deploy, because our report might be green, but when you open the bug tracker system, you're going to see all the open defects. So they cannot deploy to production unless they close all those defects.
Mm-hmm. And I think the third question was, I'm not sure it was yours, because it was somewhere in the middle also. You are cheating, you are not the third one. Okay. I'm not sure, you were the third one, or maybe it's okay. There is a new queue now open. We have time only for the last question, so we have somebody. Okay.
Thank you for the speech. My name is Pavlo. I'm from FashionNet. I have two small questions. So the first one is I want to understand why you decided to completely remove the test from suite instead of marking it as ignored. So just to see it in a one report, not to have the information in different places. Was there a reason for making this?
The reason is that, as far as I'm aware, you can't do it with testng. Testng is just showing you passed, failed, and skipped, and it's not including the disabled in this report. So if you want to see them there, you could probably just download testng, make your changes, and build your own version.
Okay, and the next question, if you have ever heard about Report Portal. So it's the tool for managing your test reports. It has some artificial intelligence algorithm for marking your tests based on your previous failure reasons. So maybe this tool can help you to handle the situations like you are facing.
Yes, definitely. It will be nice to share it with me after
Report
this.
Portal.io.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we do not have more time for more questions. Aneta, do you have a Twitter page?
Unfortunately, I'm a little bit old school and I don't have Twitter.
So you need to
I
contact...
promise to answer to anyone who writes in LinkedIn or email.
And if you want to destroy Aneta's break, you can also try to catch her during the break. So please, thank you. Thank you very much, Aneta.
Thanks so much.